Ed Cameron's, now Al Bielek's, journey through time started when he jumped off the USS Eldridge in 1943 during the Philadelphia experiment. Al, can you describe what the civilization was like in the year 2749?
What I saw of this civilization was a highly advanced civilization, and technologically we had floating cities, we had ground-based cities. The floating ones are anti-gravity, up to 2,100, 2,200 stories. And in addition, if they wanted the city to be a floating city, it was a floating city. And they would move it around from one part of the earth to another part of the earth. They had all the modern conveniences that we know today, plus some. They had synthetic food units, if I remember, in the apartments. You could have fresh produce brought in, or you could synthesize, either way you preferred. They did have restaurants, and there were, of course, stores to go shopping in. You could buy stuff if you wanted to. Buy, of course, is a misnomer. There were no banks, there was no money. Purely socialism, 100% pure socialism. Everything was free. The cities based on the ground had these transportation tubes called accelerons. It was sort of like a moving sidewalk. You had one type, which was a moving sidewalk. You jump on a thing and move through the city. You can jump off where you wanted. The other was a tube-type apparatus where you jump in a thing and it would propel you, in which you were propelled through the tube to it's sort of like a continuous belt. You get on it and you get off where you wanted to get off. And some other part of the city. The kids used to love this thing. It was entertainment for them. And in terms of entertainment, they had television, if I remember correctly now, they had radio of sorts. They had theater, they had many of the things which we have today, except they've been carried a little bit further. And they did have travel. You could travel to another city. They did have rail systems that covered, at least where I was in the United States. They had rail systems allegedly all over the planet, but they were not like we have today. The rail systems were much wider. They were at least twice the width track-wise. The cars were two and a half times as wide. They were longer, and they were made out to be much more like an excursion trip, if you will, like you would go on an ocean liner on an excursion or on a cruise. You would take a cruise on a train. You would get on it, and you'd have bands, you would have all kinds of entertainment, this sort of thing. You go across the country. The system of governing, if you will, totally synthetic system, actually, and synthetic intelligence computers. I said they had one in each city. Obviously, not all the cities were the same. But it was interesting that there was no external structure of government other than the local government of each city. It was a city-state, if you will, i.e. each city was a rule and a law unto itself, though they all followed a common format in terms of the fact that each city was ruled by the synthetic intelligence. It was a huge crystalline structure floating in the middle of the room. No physical connections to anything we could see. And as I found out, each synthetic intelligence unit was connected to the rest. So there was a worldwide network, a worldwide web, if you will. The grand experiment with socialism controlled by a highly intelligent synthetic intelligence system rather than by humans, because they realize if humans control this, it gets out of hand. You get an elite group who runs the show and runs it for their own benefit and their own profit, which is exactly what's going on the planet today. But they wanted to try and make a system of socialism work because they didn't want to go back to all of the evils and the problems of the banking systems, particularly private banking, which has existed in the last 10 centuries, up to this time. And they didn't want to see that repeated with everything leading into wars and fights for the sake of profit. The fact that this synthetic intelligence was a highly radioactive crystalline form structure, so far as I could tell, because I was called in for an interview, and to be interviewed you had to put on a lead-lined suit with completely radiation-proof, and it would interview you telepathically.
Well, what did the computer want to know from you?
Computer, if I can call it that, eventually wanted to know what I was doing there and what I knew about how I got there. At that point, I didn't remember anything about how I got there. It was sort of like I arrived and became part of the city, part of the society. I sort of absorbed the place and became part of me, and I became part of it, so to speak. Like I had been born in it, but which was not the case. There was some false memories involved and a huge block as to where I'd been, how I got there, what was I doing there. Well, I asked a lot of questions. Well, what about war? What's that? Unknown. I asked them, well, wasn't the war in the past? They said, oh yes, we had wars in the past. I said, that's long gone. Well, do you have means in case of something like an invasion from outside? Suppose somebody from outside wanted to come in and take over the planet. No satellite system? Wouldn't answer that one. Do you have means of defending yourself? I said, yes, we do. He said, what are they? I said, you do not have the need to know. Apparently they had, shall we say, built-in armaments, perhaps high-powered laser systems, perhaps more advanced systems. I don't know, I never found out. And apparently it was never needed. Well, the unit which I talked with, the particular intelligence system, we had a nickname for them. They called it the Lama, much like the Lama in a monastery.
The Dalai Lama.
Yes, much like the Dalai Lama, if you will. But there was one inbuilt function which was allegedly inviolate. They could never lie to anyone about anything. If they felt it inappropriate to give an answer on something, they just say, I can't give you an answer on that at this point, or that's not in your domain or whatever, but they wouldn't lie about it. One of them did lie, apparently, at one time, and one of them was scrapped and replaced. Found there was some basic flaw in that unit that had gotten to the point where it could assume to lie. Whatever the reason was, it was destroyed. What intrigued me was the fact that here is a synthetic intelligence computer running this whole system, and we're actually running the planet. These things didn't build themselves. Who built them? That was where it got much more interesting, because eventually I was introduced to the builders of the intelligence system, the computer systems. They had a name for themselves, the wingmakers. It was in the 26th century they decided to engage in the experiment of synthetic intelligence to see if they could run the whole planet. They didn't interfere with the computer operations unless something went wrong. And if they found that a computer went out of its bounds of its own programming limits, they would pull it and replace separate from the main cities. They had their own culture, they had their own art, their own, I wouldn't say religious beliefs, but their own philosophical beliefs, which had gone beyond religion. Religion didn't exist, I might add, in the 28th century.
What did they think of God, or what was their concept of God?
They did think of a supreme being, but they thought of it in a very different sense than most religions do today. Most religions today take a very narrow view of the punishing God and the rewarding God, and you do what he says, everything's fine. If you don't, he'll punish you. That's long gone in terms of their outlook. It's considered a supreme being that it is very difficult to get to know, that is beyond all of us in terms of awareness and understanding, but it, the God, learns through communicating through us and contacting us and being part of our experience, that we are part of God just as God is part of us, and it's a two-way street type thing. It's a reciprocal arrangement, if you will. And that God is beyond the physical universe as we know it, but maintains contact with the physical universe through us. And that was apparently their attitude and their religion.
And the wingmakers then are alive and well today.
They're alive and well today in the 28th century. They can apparently travel to this era, but they're not living per se in this era. Mm-hmm. Or is to be, if you will.
Well, they say history repeats itself, you know.
Good point.
Yeah.